Some people, and I say this with genuine warmth, cannot let go of a single thing. Not in the hoarding sense, not in the clingy sense, but in the way they hold on to moments that happened years ago with the same clarity most people reserve for things that happened this morning. They remember the exact shade of light coming through the kitchen window on a random Tuesday in 2007. They remember what their friend was wearing during a conversation that probably meant nothing to anyone else. They remember the feeling of a specific afternoon with such precision that mentioning it out loud makes them sound either deeply sentimental or slightly unhinged, depending on who's listening. And here's what's strange about it. These aren't necessarily big memories. They're not weddings or graduations or the moments you're supposed to preserve in amber. They're small, ordinary, completely unremarkable fragments of a life that somehow refuse to fade. You've carried them for a decade, maybe two, and they haven't asked for permission to stay. They just did. That's the first thing worth examining, the specificity of it, because it's not actually random what stays and what dissolves, and it has almost nothing to do with what you think you should remember. Here's something about memory that most people don't fully grasp. Your brain doesn't archive experiences based on their objective importance. It doesn't care if something was technically significant or life-changing or worthy of being preserved. It cares about how you felt when it happened. That's the whole mechanism. Emotional resonance and meaning are the criteria your nervous system uses to decide what gets encoded deeply and what just passes through like weather. So when you were 14 and you sat on your bedroom floor listening to a song that made you feel understood in a way you couldn't articulate, and now, 15 years later, you can still remember the exact texture of the carpet and the way the sunlight hit the wall, that's not because you decided to memorize it. It's because in that moment, something in you recognized itself. Your brain tagged it as significant not because anyone told you it was, but because emotionally it mattered. You didn't try to hold on to it, it held on to you. And this is where people who cherish old memories start to look less like they're stuck in the past and more like they're wired to feel things at a different depth. There's a concept in psychology called emotional intensity, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Some people experience emotions on a different scale, not better, not worse, just more vividly. The small joys hit harder, the quiet sadness lingers longer. A moment of connection with another person doesn't just feel nice. It feels like something worth protecting. And when you feel things that intensely, your brain treats those experiences accordingly. It doesn't just file them away, it builds monuments to them. People who hold on to old memories aren't necessarily nostalgic in the wistful, longing sense. Often, they're just people who were paying attention when the moment happened, and their emotional system responded by making it permanent. Think about the last memory you have that you didn't choose to keep but somehow can't forget. Not a major life event, but something small. The way someone laughed, the smell of a place you'll probably never go back to, a conversation that felt important even though nothing was technically decided. For some people, this happens constantly. They move through life collecting these moments almost against their will, not because they're trying to hold on to the past, but because their present tense is just that awake. There's also something happening with meaning-making that most people don't consciously track. Human beings are pattern recognition machines. We're constantly, relentlessly trying to make sense of our lives, to build a coherent narrative out of the chaos of existing. And the people who cherish old memories are often the ones doing that work most actively, even if they don't realize it. They're not just remembering, they're connecting. That afternoon in the park ties to this conversation 5 years later, which ties to the person you've become now. The memories aren't isolated. They're part of a story you're telling yourself about who you are and how you got here. Researchers have found that people with a strong sense of narrative identity, people who can tell a coherent story about their own lives, tend to have better mental health and a stronger sense of purpose. And you can't build that narrative without the raw material of memory. The people who remember are the people who are constantly, quietly constructing meaning from their own experience. They're not dwelling, they're authoring. But here's the part that I think cuts deepest. The memories you cherish, especially the small ones, they're often the moments where you felt most like yourself. Not the self you were trying to be or the self other people needed you to be, but the unguarded version that only comes out in specific conditions. The version of you that existed in your childhood bedroom at 2 a.m., the version that showed up during a long drive with a friend when the conversation went deeper than either of you planned. The version that felt something true and didn't have to explain it to anyone. Those memories stay because they're proof. Proof that you've been real, that you felt things that mattered, that your inner life has always been richer than what shows on the surface. People who hold on to these moments are often people who need that proof, not because they're insecure, but because they're introspective enough to know that most of life is performance, and the moments that aren't, the moments where you were just genuinely present and unfiltered, those are worth protecting. There's also a relational component here that's worth naming. People who cherish memories often cherish people in a very specific way. They don't just remember that someone was there. They remember how that person made them feel, the specific quality of their presence, the way they laughed, or the particular way they listened. And this isn't about idealization, it's about attention. It's about having been present enough in the relationship to notice things that most people miss. When you tell someone you remember a tiny detail from years ago, something they probably forgot the next day, you're really telling them you mattered to me, you still do. This is a form of love that doesn't announce itself loudly but runs deep. The people who do this are often the ones who experience relationships as the most meaningful part of being alive, and they treat memories of those relationships accordingly. They're archivists of connection, holding onto proof that they were seen and that they saw others in return. We live in a culture obsessed with moving forward, with optimization and productivity and letting go of anything that doesn't serve your future self. And in that context, cherishing old memories can look like a failure to progress, like you're stuck or unable to live in the present. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what memory actually does. Memory isn't the opposite of presence, it's the evidence of it. The reason you remember that moment so clearly is because you were actually there when it happened. You weren't distracted or numb or going through the motions. You were awake to your own life, and your brain recognized that and preserved it. The people who have rich, detailed memories of their past are often the people who have been most alive in it. There's also something here about continuity, about the thread that connects who you were to who you are. When you cherish an old memory, you're not trying to go back to it. You're acknowledging that the person you were then is still part of you. That 10-year-old who felt wonder at something small, that 17-year-old who felt heartbreak for the first time, that 23-year-old trying to figure out what kind of adult they wanted to be, they're all still here. The memories are how you stay in conversation with them, how you honor the fact that you've been many versions of yourself and none of them were disposable. This is integration, not nostalgia. It's the work of becoming whole. So if you're someone who holds on to the small moments, the ones no one else remembers or thinks to ask about, this is for you. You're not living in the past or failing to move on or wasting emotional energy on things that are over. You're just someone whose heart has been paying attention this whole time, cataloging the moments where life felt real, where connection happened, where you were briefly, genuinely yourself. You're someone who understands, maybe without ever putting it into words, that a life is made of moments, and the small ones count just as much as the big ones. Maybe more because they're the ones you chose to notice when no one told you to. There are worse ways to move through the world than remembering it tenderly, than treating your own experience as something worth keeping. That might actually be the whole point of having a heart that feels things deeply enough to hold on to them long after they're gone.